And this is the moment my cat chooses to go crazy with the peacock feather over there. Okay, as long as he's over there, we'll be good. Okay. He's going crazy. He's got like the big black eyes and the... Oh, gosh. Okay. Anyway, welcome, everybody. Hi, hello. My name is Margaret Pennard. Welcome to my channel. So thank you much. Thank you so much for stopping by. I'm here today as part of our March of the Moderns. We've got our fourth buddy read discussion, and today it's going to be High Wages by Dorothy Whipple, the cool gray cover from Persephone. So I just wanted to point out we're going through our bingo. This is actually a really good book for the bingo board, I found, and I didn't know ahead of time, so good for, you know, sneakily cheating me. And to discuss with me here today is Katja Weinert. So I'll just give her a little intro. She's another booktuber, and that's how we found each other, commenting on each other's channels. She describes herself as a bookish project manager, creator, writer, and self-development fan. Yay! And she's got a background in administration, advocacy, project management, in education, healthcare, and charity sectors. So we're definitely going to be diving into some social issues in our discussion of this book, I think, and that will prove very valuable. So welcome, Katja.
Thank you. I didn't realize you read the about section, so that's great because I had like an essay on there.
It's short and sweet. It's like very job search, like to the point, and gives you a good overview. So I thought it was very well done. So we're going to dive into our discussion of High Wages by Dorothy Whipple, which is a book written in 1930 originally. And this is both our first time reading Dorothy Whipple. So she's pretty popular in a certain set in the UK, but I don't think many people know her here. I think she's sort of like a sleeper hit. I don't know. How did you hear about her first?
Through March of the Moderns, by having her on the spreadsheet. So I had originally chosen another book, and then obviously I thought, you know what, High Wages sounds good, I'll go for that. And I hadn't heard of her before, and I hadn't also heard of the publisher, Persephone Books.
Oh,
so
okay.
Both of those you actually put on my radar with March of the Moderns.
Nice. I was just glad this is recording for Persephone to see that. Nice. I'm going to start the comments here. The place where I put the bingo board, so if you wanted to check it out or if you wanted to see who is listed in our Google spreadsheet, that's on the blog as part of the last 4 or 5 posts, so feel free to check that out. That's so exciting. Okay, well, I heard about Persephone and then Dorothy Whipple because I was doing a bookshop crawl when I was in London. The last time I was there was with my mom in 2018, and I never get to stay in London because it's too expensive, but she was with me. I was like, oh, we're gonna spend 3 days in London. so I looked up all the bookshops, and Persephone was definitely on my list, and I just like having Google mapped it and then seeing like what they're about, Lamb's Conduit Street, and I was like, yes. So that's how I found out about it. And they are known for bringing back forgotten authors of the early 20th century, especially women. So this was like a great demographic for March of the Moderns.
I'm hoping that the background noise isn't going to be too long, but one of my neighbors has got a motorbike, so hopefully they'll zoom off in a second. But that's really interesting about Persephone, because I really like the ethos, that whole concentration on female writers. And I noticed that obviously Dorothy Whipple's High Wages, being written in 1930, then went out of print for such a long time until Persephone brought it back. I think it was in 2009, it was around then, when they reprinted it. So I really like that idea of bringing back books that we wouldn't otherwise be able to read. So, yeah.
Right. And it may go against the booktube ethos of what's newest and brightest and boldest and most hyped, but I feel like that mission, it just jives with my mission, which is like, there are a lot of great titles that we already have that are already printed that are wasting away in someone's space, yearning for space to breathe free, or whatever the quote is. So, you know, giving a little extra love to stories that are already out there that we can learn from and discuss and, you know, give back their value. So I thought that was nice. So initial impressions, enjoyment of the novel. That's always my first question. Sort of how did it hit you? Did you enjoy reading it? Was this worth it?
So first page, an introduction to Jane Carter. I thought, oh, this is fun. I like the language. And then when it jumped from Jane Carter sort of like into the next character's sort of like perspective, point of view, I thought, that's unusual. You don't get that so often anymore. There was a lot of point of view shifts. So stylistically, it didn't take long for me to get used to it. But stylistically, I thought that's very unusual. You don't get that anymore, because that's almost, I guess it's a no-no, you know, like to jump into a different character's head. You don't, without that sort of division in the chapter as well, because sometimes you have a scene and then you have that little pause and then it goes to the next character. And I didn't quite feel that, but it wasn't a barrier. So I thought that was interesting, the fact that she writes so smoothly that you get used to it. Yeah, so first impressions were very positive.
Yeah, I noticed that. I'm getting a very strange sort of cloudy echo when I speak from the other end. I'll just speak low and hope it doesn't get too annoying to people. So and now I remember that I took actual notes rather than tabs in a book that's across the room.
Well, you've got time to get it.
Okay, I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Good.
All right. So I remember writing down, this is what made me remember. I remember writing down, oh, we switched to another person's head in the second chapter, but I didn't write anything about it again because I didn't notice it anymore. So you're definitely right. Yeah.
And I did the same thing. I wrote it in my notes and I was like, oh, we've gone from Jane Carter into, I think it's Mr. Chadwick, because this is at the start.
I thought it was the woman.
Maybe I didn't notice that. I might not have noticed that because Mr. Chadwick made quite an impression on me, and not a favorable one.
Oh, okay. Here's what I put. Chapter 4, page 41. We're in the third point of view in 4 chapters. So that's when I noticed it. So I guess it must have gone from Jane to the stuck-up girl to Chadwick, or Chadwick to the stuck-up girl. And I was like, okay, how many times? But she does flip back and forth, but it's smooth like glass for me too.
Yeah, I mean, by chapter 4, I don't think I even noticed it. It was right at the start, you know, like she coming into seeing that job. So I think you've got that bit about, you know, seeing the job and everything around then. And she goes into the shop. That's when I thought, oh, hang on, because she talks to someone and we jump into their sort of like space. I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah, I learned about this being called head hopping when I was starting out writing and going, it's a no-no. And then I thought, well, if you do it right, it's not, because yeah. And I just wanted to highlight that glorious moment at the beginning. So there's a childlike way, I think, that the writing brings up the beauty in the world and the sort of not lucky, but like serendipity of things. And this is chapter 1, page 1 of the book that I really loved. After a couple of paragraphs, as she stood on the cobbles of the empty marketplace, a beam of light struck suddenly from the right to her very feet. She looked up and saw that an obscuring eiderdown hanging in Chadwick's shop window had been pushed aside, and that a small man had stepped into the window and was affixing a piece of paper low down in the right-hand corner of the pane. Then, stepping carefully around the tea cozies and peaked napkins, he retired and replaced the eiderdown. Wanted, she looks at the sign. A young lady to assist in the shop. Apply within. And you're like, oh, it's like the sword in the stone moment, right?
Yeah, and I think especially for her, because you get that sense of she's going, oh, all these, you know, all this has led me to, you know, this moment of seeing that sign there.
Right. It's definitely the things start to happen in my life type moment. It's good. It's extremely quick to have that on the first page. So that was pretty neat. Okay, I also really enjoyed the novel. I was trying to keep it a bit measured in terms of like doing a couple chapters, stop, doing a few chapters and stop, just to like touch base with you and make sure we weren't, vastly ahead and going to forget it or whatever. But then the last, I don't know, third of the book, I just sort of ran through in one day because I was like, I can't tell what's going to happen. It was delightful. So I really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I did. I think you said I'm done, and I was done sort of like 4 hours later. So yeah, it was good.
Good timing. See, there we go. Same mind. So as part of the background research, I had two sources. I had the introduction, which is the preface by Jane Brockett, who's another Northern writer, shall we say, and then the by page on Persephone, which has an introduction about why they have her in their catalog, why they have this book in their catalog, and sort of the history of the book. And so I thought I'd take a couple comments from the publisher to bat about a bit. We've got Dorothy Whipple categorized as a supremely moral novelist. And I thought that's interesting. Do I feel guided morally by this? Do I feel like there's a lesson by the end? Do I feel like one of the reviewers I read who said it leaves you to draw your own conclusions? Without any spoilers, how would you respond to supremely moral as a qualification?
Well, I would disagree that I would get a particular moral lesson from it. I thought it was actually not one of those stories where it's telling you this is right and this is wrong. It was just very realistic. It's sort of going, right, this is real life sort of thing, and these things happen. And yes, Jane did take away a huge lesson, and was really impacted by all of the events in that story. But I don't think that it's being judgmental about everything that she did and she went through. So in that way, I don't think it's supremely moralistic. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
There's that echo. It comes and goes. So I hope.
I'm not hearing it too much, so you're okay with my end.
Okay, good. I definitely don't get the sense, like from some books, that it's saying this inexorable push towards like ye must kind of thing, but I feel like it presents, especially her fellow shop girl, Maggie. Yeah, she presents her. I think the author presents her in a very sympathetic way, but kind of in a condescending way, because she's, a character that has these limits, and you're told very firmly that like she's not mentally, she's not going to branch out from here, so don't hope for any more for her, which is kind of strange. I mean, that's kind of like putting a foot down in terms of this is the class she belongs to and she's not going to leave it. So that was a little firm in my opinion. But then I really liked the way that it sort of was on her side for the wages portion, where she stands up for herself and says, this is how I'm useful to you in the business, and this is why you should give me a raise, etc. And I think it's impossible to be on the other side of that debate, right? And one of the tweets I sent out this morning had a link to The Cut, where this woman, Katie LaRue, had done an article on how reading this book gave her the confidence to ask for a raise successfully. And I was like, yes! So it's one of those things that 1930, yes, but also 2020, like women and power relationships just as relevant.
Yeah, and that's why I thought the character of Mr. Chadwick, I mean, I immediately disliked her employer because of that whole idea of making the girls wait, the girls that, like he made Maggie wait before she announced that Jane was there for the position. And he wasn't even doing anything. So he's writing, it says there, unnecessarily with his fountain pen, just trying to look busy. And that whole idea of, having this character who exerts power that he already has. He doesn't need to do it. He's already, he's already wealthier than they are. He already has all of the power, but he is so mean. And throughout the book, this family, his wife as well. And I thought that was interesting. I thought the relationship he has with his wife, he's so mean to these shop girls. And it's almost like he takes out on them, like the fact that his wife is really the powerful one in their relationship. And Mrs. Green is the powerful one in his relationship with Mrs. Greenwood. Yeah. So, like these strong women really fluster him. And then he's like, well, I pay these two girls and then I can treat them sort of mean. I felt that. I was like, oh, I really hate this guy.
Yeah. Initially, so the physical descriptions of Mr. Chadwick, like a small man with, what does he describe him? Shells or something. So he's just got like two little things of hair on his head. The language in this is really nice. It's like surprising colloquial. It's not the cliches you've heard of. It's like a little twist, like something that's very natural, but you wouldn't think to pair it. So I really liked the language in this. But the way she describes Mr. Chadwick and Wilfred at the beginning is kind of similar. And I was like, he's not much. I don't really like this character. I don't really want him to succeed.
I kind of liked him, except his relationship with Maggie, who you said, she's not going to branch out and everything. And I think a lot of people can see that. And what they like about her is that she is quite a warm character and she takes you as you are. And then she's, just sort of like goes with the flow. But she doesn't. The downside is, although she seems quite warm and, welcoming and everything, she doesn't really take on the cues of the other people and what they want. It's more like she thinks, okay, well, this is how I see you, and therefore this is what our relationship is going to be. And, she's constantly wanting to have that close relationship with Wilfred, for example, wanting to kiss him and hug him and hold him. And I was like, oh, come on, Wilfred, just be strong and explain that you don't mind taking her for walks because you like your exercise and you don't mind her chattering along, but don't lead her on because you can tell that she likes you more than you like her. So that I didn't like about him, but I didn't mind him being quite surly and moody and stuff because I kind of felt for him. He almost didn't have an equivalent that he could speak to until Jane comes along and she's got the same interests as he does, and then he sort of comes to life.
I'm just closing out some more windows to see if I can make the echo go away. Yeah, and one of the things I thought of when you were saying that, is there another character that has that equivalent that's a different class? Maybe Mrs. Greenwood. So if Maggie is at the shop girl level and she doesn't have the ambition to get out of her social class, but she also doesn't have the imagination to understand that other people want other things. Is there another person that's like that, that's in a different social class? So that Dorothy Whipple is showing us that it's a character trait. It's not a class thing. And I'm like, yeah, Mrs. Greenwood doesn't change at all. She has a downfall and there is no change,
I love that actually, where the people were going, oh, I passed in the street and I wondered if I should avert my eyes and not engage. And then she just launched herself at me saying, do this, do that. And they're like, what? She hasn't changed. Her social position is totally slid.
Yeah.
But she's still ordering me about.
Yeah. I loved how it gave her a booming voice. And that's like her, signature trait. And that doesn't waver. That was a good device, I thought.
Yeah.
Anything else moral? Oh, what about Lily? What are your thoughts about Lily, the washer, what's it called? She doesn't live in, but she does the cleaning and washing for.
She sort of does all the scrubbing and all the hard work everywhere. Yeah. Difficult one. I found that really difficult because I actually found her quite sympathetic in one way. But equally, I kind of felt the way Jane did when she is, like she's on a roll with her complaining. And no matter what solutions people provide, she just kind of goes, nah, this is my lot. And this is how it is. And she continues. And you're like, oh, for goodness sakes, Lily, listen to a solution. But I actually found it hilarious that her solution towards the end of the book sort of like worked out for her and Bob, I think is her husband, isn't it? But I struggled with Lily because I felt the same frustrations that our main character feels in terms of she is a really likable person, she's kind, and she's so hardworking. But all of the hardships, and she's always living in the past. I used to have this and I used to have that. And yeah, it's tricky. I liked her, but I don't know if that's because part of me was pitying her. I don't know. How do you feel about her?
At the beginning, she kept describing the different things that she missed out of the house. I thought she might have been making it up because it seemed like so detailed, like it might have been something she saw in the shop. And she's just, yeah, he drank it away and I had to give away this pot and that pot. And it was painted so beautifully. And I'm like, she's a charwoman. How would she have this savings in this house? And like, I'm not getting the whole picture here. So I actually suspected her story at the beginning. And then, it was sort of borne out with these are ups and downs of the life and the economy. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I believe her now. And I don't know. Which side of the fence was I on when she was pleading for Bob to stay in? I was like, no, Jane, stand your ground.
I know, but it still worked out. But I felt that way. I was like, don't do it.
Yeah. I actually just commented on Jer from John to Stories because he was talking about drinking and alcoholism in the Finnish novel context. And I thought I was just reading about this. And when the wife was not enough of an influence because of the sort of toxic relationship that they'd set up, the class barrier came in for a good result because it was like he's afraid of the fine lady being disappointed in him. And so that was the sort of relationship that exerted more tension or discipline, which I thought was interesting and sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting, that whole class division and the way it bears out on the lives of everyone, because you got Mr. Chadwick, for example, always thinking, well, I should be as good as, is it Varick or Vanier? Oh, I've forgotten his name.
Banner?
Yes.
Hey, Shane.
So he always wants to be as good as this other trades guy, but that like he's accepted into the ball and everything. But when Mr. Chadwick manages to get those tickets, and then he's so shamed by Mrs. Green, I thought the whole time that he sort of like he sort of debases himself in the shop all the time and go, oh yes, Mrs. Greenwood, yes this, yes that, and then she shames him at the ball and he just accepts it. And then that realization when she has her slip from, social grace, and you're thinking, these people are so fickle, like they yeah. I thought it was, I guess in that way, that whole idea of, being supremely moralistic comes in, because you've got Jane being that person who always has her sort of like sense of who she is and what is right, no matter what class she's dealing with. Whereas the other people are quite fluid and change based on social class.
Especially as regards Mrs. Briggs. I thought she was such a good character. Yeah. We'll maybe step into her in the next question. But yeah, that ball, that was crazy. What was I going to say about Chadwick and Venner? I'll just say Venner. Yeah, what's interesting is that the narrator describes the competitor, haberdasher or whoever, as someone who maybe he's like the other Jane. We're in a mirror universe. He's like the other Jane who like made his way up in the world, knows his worth, knows that other people should treat him a certain way. And so they do. Because what are you going to do if someone states their worth in your face and like, isn't going to kowtow? And so the Chadwicks of the world versus the Janes of the world is sort of like,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she does exactly that, doesn't she? Later on in the book, she knows her worth and she gets so much respect because of knowing her trade and all of that, and having the confidence in that knowledge as well. And those are all the things that Mr. Chadwick was like sort of throwing in her face and going, "You're never going to be able to do this, that, and the other," because of his own insecurities, I think.
Yeah.
And also because he kind of knew that she had all the, like the ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. Ugh. Okay. Do you want to do Mrs. Briggs now, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Yep.
Yeah. Thoughts, Mrs. Briggs as a character?
I thought it was interesting, and I'm going to have to try and look. Well, you might remember, but when Jane comes across Mrs. Briggs, there's that instant, that relationship, that simpatico, that I like this woman. And Mrs. Briggs is so downtrodden. She's this grand lady, just as grand as Mrs. Greenwood, because their husbands are partners. But she's the total opposite, because her social position has been like sort of like meteoric, hasn't it? She started out really low, and I guess she's new money, whereas Mrs. Greenwood might have been old money sort of thing. And she always feels it because her family makes her feel it. They're like, oh gosh, she hasn't adopted the mannerisms that we have. We've managed to adapt ourselves and become these upper class people. We talk like them, we walk with them, and whatever. And Mrs. Briggs is dropping her H's everywhere and still trying to save money when she doesn't, in their minds, have to save any money, because she could spend as much as she likes because she's really wealthy. I thought Mrs. Briggs was a really lovely character and really well written. But that whole thing of Jane immediately going, I like Mrs. Briggs. Later down the line, she comes across a different character, and now I can't think of who it is, where she thinks, I don't like this person. And it made me think that a lot of the serendipity moments and a lot of the other moments for Jane have been around intuition and her perceptions, or a lot of what she does is intuition. For example, when she falls for Noel, when she sees him, it was that whole thing of she thinks she's being quite logical and going, oh, usually I don't like men in general. I haven't got an interest in them. And then she's like, oh, I have this attraction to Noel. And everything is sort of like intuitive. And she doesn't know everything about him. And she still holds on to that initial impression for a very long time, all the way through, actually, to the end.
Does he deserve it? No, men never do.
I was going to get to that, because I was thinking to myself, oh, and at some point, going with your comment about does he deserve it, I noticed that shift. Even though she loves him and is loyal to him and everything, she holds on to her initial impression from the start to the end. Her language does change, because at some point she starts calling him her dear boy. And I think that tells you something about the levels of maturity there. And the levels of being able to deal with things in a particular way. She is definitely miles ahead, I think, empathetically, mentally, everything. She's just superior in that relationship to me.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I'll circle back to Mrs. Briggs in a little bit, but I thought we could skip on to the title. So high wages, and I learned this in the introduction and the Persephone page, is based on the Carlyle quotation, which has been disputed because Katja found a different place that's like slightly different, but here's the one I found. Experience doth take dreadfully high wages, but she teacheth like none other. So basically alluding to the fact that life experience can be hard, but you really learn the lesson, or you really grow in ways that you can't if you never try anything, if you never like go out on the road and hoe your row. Anyway, one of those sayings. Agricultural metaphors, not my specialty. So yeah, we talked a little bit about this before. The title, I was just going to point out that, big high roller that I am, I also have the Persephone book, The Carlyles at Home by Tia Holm. But I got this because it's an analysis of their domestic situation in the mid-19th century. So it's about the house that they had, which is now a museum, and yeah, how it was kept, what kind of material things, what this represented in the Victorian century, and it's like fascinating. It's not a novel. It's just sort of like their trials and tribulations of the budgeting and the work of the day, and it's very interesting. I'd never heard of Thomas Carlyle before, and so like he's this big famous dude for the UK, and I was surprised to find this out.
Yeah, I was surprised as well. I mean, he's Scottish, apparently inspired by Shakespeare and various others. But I thought it was interesting. I mean, he died in 1881, but I always find it interesting when I come across the biographies of people like this, because it makes me think about, like when you're ultra upper class in like the 1900s, or not even 1900s, it was the 19th century. Have you noticed how people can be 101 things? Because if you look at the things that he was, he's like, educator, philosopher, whatever. And it's like a non-stop list, whereas we all, sort of like get shoehorned into doing specific things. and I just find it interesting that if you're of the higher class in, Britain at that time, you could, the world was your oyster. You could have an interest in whatever and specialize and drop your specialism and go on to something else.
Yeah, it's the opportunity. It's the opportunity, totally. I picture it like the pyramid, right? And so if you have all the laborers at the bottom of the pyramid and like the top, the creme de la creme at the top, they are a very few people that have all the airspace, so they can do all the Renaissance things and have all the opportunity, and that's how it was.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you caught my comment here, some very Muriel's Wedding moments with Mrs. Briggs. Have you seen that movie? It's like 20
I have, yeah, I love it, with Toni Collette, yeah.
Yeah, where the mother is just completely shunted aside because she's not like up with the new image of Muriel. And
that's true.
That was like, oh, one of the first things that like made me cry at a movie. Okay. Anything else on the title? I feel like that's sort of.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. I also came across that same thing to say it was from, the idea of Thomas Carlyle having said that. But the variation that I came across was that he had said high school wages as opposed to just high wages. But I think as a title, high wages works perfectly, because that's exactly what she strives for, because she's paid a pittance when she starts out at Chadwick. And I was livid. I was livid when Mr. Chadwick touched an item that was sold, and then he made that commission his commission. He's like, "That's my sale," and she's like, "Excuse me, how is that your sale? I did all of this work." And he's like, "I touched this."
Yeah.
Like, back off. What are you doing?
Totally. And like that totally goes on today in whatever technological context, I'm sure.
Yeah.
High wages. Experience doth take dreadfully high wages. So like literally in this quote, he's saying that if you're the employer and experience is your employee, it's taking very high wages from you. I don't really like the analysis, the literal analysis, but I feel like it to me, it means that she's been through a lot by the end of this novel.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I mean, she's loved and learned and is moving on. And I hope she's in a better place. It doesn't tell you, but it does leave room, which is like a good ending for me. I like that kind of ending.
Yeah. I felt like she'd be in a better place because she doesn't know it yet, sort of thing. And I think how we end with her kind of going, this is the end. And then you've got that sort of like second last sentence from Wilfred going, but this isn't the end. When he's, like he goes to hold her hand, and you think, this is a really mature guy. He knows absolutely everything. And yeah, he's just there to support her. So I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, he's got a little less self-respect than Gilbert and Anne of Green Gables. I feel like he's kind of this. He's a similar character of like always being there, but not being the role that he wants to be.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so I've got another quote here. Persephone says, Dorothy Whipple, she is not, of course, a great writer. You could not take one of her sentences, as you can with, say, Molly Panter Downs, and hold it up to the light. Agree, disagree?
Well, I don't know the other writer, but I think she's brilliant. I thought that the way she brought the characters to life, and like you say, initially I was like, oh, she's head hopping. But even that didn't matter to me because it just, the whole style flowed for me. And she's got such moments of humor as well. I think, like you said to me, have you reached this chapter? And I hadn't yet, but I read it. And then I said, yep, I've gotten there. But I was killing myself laughing when I read about the Reverend Edwards. And I said to you, which bit was it? And you said that, what bit it was. And I was like, yep, I can totally get that. And then I got to the end of, I think it was chapter 13, and I was like, have you seen the end of chapter 13? Because that's a sort of like almost laugh out loud moments. So I thought, she gets the tone right. There's some heartbreaking moments, and there's lots of humor. So I thought she's brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think there are sentences that you could hold up to the light and like still have them shine. Especially the pieces at the beginning that are so tentative and tender about discovering beauty in nature and sort of like opening up this chasm in yourself and realizing that the world is so much bigger. Like I thought that was so like a raw moment of beauty that is risky for an author because it's so earnest, and maybe that's 1930, but also maybe not. I mean, cynicism was already there in 1930. So I think that's pretty brave to put that in there and go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was also, like the bits that moved you about nature and stuff. I thought that was a big difference as well between Noel and Wilfred. So, for example, Noel is very much office-based during his, and then, well, office-based, I say, but actually the other guy does all the work. His assistant does all the work, and then he comes in and gets briefed on what he needs to say and do. So he doesn't need to do much other than play tennis, golf, and be miserable at home. And not have a relationship with his child until his child is old enough to be interesting. So I didn't have much thought for Noel there. Whereas you get Wilfred, always going out in nature, going for a walk. And at the moment, there was a specific moment where he's just terribly, terribly hurt, and he goes for a walk. And he suddenly feels better just by noticing some moss growing on a wall with the little droplets on the top, and the way they described it. And I was like, actually, I already feel better for him as well. It's like written so beautifully, and he's like, just taking this breath and recentering himself.
Yes. Yes, I've been comforted by moss as well, Wilfred. In fact, when I go on walks every once in a while, I'll bring back a piece of moss because it's everywhere in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll put it in my pots because, they get filled with water and whatnot. And so I feel like it's helping the plant to grow, but also giving me another burst of green and yet another shade. I love moss. Okay, well, I'm going to ask about the shrimp pots because it's definitely a funny moment. But I also then sat back and wondered, like, why is this included? Is it just for humor, or is it to illustrate something else about Mrs. Briggs and, like, moral strength or knowing who you are? So I don't think this is spoilery. There's a holiday. They go to a seaside town. They bring their own food because it's ration times during the war, and they have like a return the glass for a deposit on these like little potted shrimps.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Briggs forgets them in the fridge or whatever, and then comes back to pick them up to drop them off the recycling place or the deposit place on her way out of town. And the landlady stages like a coup and says, no. And then you find out it's because she already dropped them off and got the deposit. And you're like, oh. So yes, Was that a bigger commentary, do you think, or was that just for the humor?
Well, I think it was a bigger commentary, but it was definitely humor as well. I think the bigger commentary was around Mrs. Briggs' character, but also around how people immediately make judgments about her. So she's extremely wealthy, but she's also frugal, and she hasn't lost that frugality because she's been through a lot of hardship. And so her thinking about, oh, I want my 4 pence deposit. That was funny because they'd left the house, they're walking off, and Jane thinks, really, we're going back to this, be Airbnb, well, not Airbnb, bed and breakfast because of 4 pence. And they wander back there, and that woman is up in arms, and that woman has treated Mrs. Briggs poorly throughout, because her whole attitude towards Mrs. Briggs is like, I've had finer guests than you. And she actually throws that at her, doesn't she? She's like, you're no lady. And Mrs. Briggs is like, I didn't say I'm a lady, but I want my 4 pence,
Yeah, she gets the wrong end of both sticks, or whatever the metaphor is, right? Because she doesn't get treated with respect because she's more wealthy, and she also doesn't get the benefit of getting the glass back to get the deposit. So it's like,
exactly.
Not fair. Not fair.
And so she's justified, because right at the start, Jane says, there's some sort of drama introduced into their holiday because of Mrs. Briggs' immediate dislike of their landlady for that short period of time that they're there. But I thought it was also quite foreshadowing in the way that Dorothy Whipple explains what people look like. You get an impression immediately of what their characters are. And this woman was described as having these sort of like pinched posture, like narrowed shoulders and whatever, which was like her house.
Yeah.
Everything is so tight and sort of like mean.
Yeah, that's interesting. It says that Dorothy Whipple had a father who was an architect. So it said it showed because in her descriptions of houses, it sort of reflected the people and the taste of the people who live there. And that's a perfect example of that. Yeah.
Because the house is all tall and narrow.
Squished in by its neighbors. Yeah. What about clothing doing that function? So it's about a dress shop. It's a lot about clothing. We hear all sorts of fabrics discussed, which some I hadn't heard of. Clothing and class. How do you see that interacting or commenting on the characters themselves in this?
Yeah, well, obviously you've got Mrs. Briggs going for the cheapest, most durable when she can afford to go for stuff that's not durable and is pretty. Because she is still of that mindset, which also leads to her being sort of labeled at sight, because people, their clothes made an impression on how you treat someone. And then you've got Mrs. Greenwood always being in the latest fashion. So no,
her daughter.
Oh, her daughter. Oh, Sylvia. Yes.
It was painted on quite thick that she was just a vapid, never going to make it any other way besides being the spoiled pet of some family. And
I think she should have, ended up with the reverend. I mean, at least she inspired him to want to be a bishop, which again was one of the best bits of the writing that there was, that whole reverend thing where he's upset with Mrs. Greenwood.
that was one of the things I wrote out to you because it was just too funny. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, it's already 3/4 past. Favorite character or character arc and least favorite? And can you say?
Well, I guess character arcs would be the two main people for me. It's Jane. I mean, it's a sad character arc, but at the end, it does what the title says. That whole thing of the high wages. She gets real experience, and I think a lot of the time her intuition has really paid off for her. Intuition that yes, I can start this shop on my own when like later down the line. Intuition about Mrs. Briggs really paid off well. Loads of intuition, but Noel was sadly a letdown because her intuition about him was off. Not that she'll ever. I don't think she'll get to that realization until maybe years later or something. Yeah. I don't know whether her intuition about him. Yeah, I think that was off. Radar was off. She loved his whole idea of like his fashionability. Like how she's so enamored by his use of slang. Yeah, I don't know what he says. He says things like, "You have the most jolly eyebrows or eyelashes" when they're at the dance, and I'm like, seriously?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you think her initial impressions of him, which is that she never thought she'd find a man so pretty or something like that. But she is sort of agog in his presence and very uncomfortable and awkward. I mean, that's kind of right. And then she sort of gives into the, oh, he's interested in me. Oh, he's interesting to talk to. Oh, we're at the tavern and we're all talking together like friends, which messed her up before because she had a little trouble intuiting about friends, I will say.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So, and Lena's here. I don't, we have the spoiler alert. We're just talking about like one of the main spoiler pieces, Lena. So I don't know, put cotton in your ears or go back a little bit.
I couldn't resist because Noel makes me feel things.
Well, see, his arc, it's so disappointing because he goes like this. You know, you think he's going to break out and actually live like he did in the war, which is unfortunately a recognizable thing that privileged men went into the war and actually like enjoyed it. Yeah,
had a purpose, especially because they weren't given the worst positions. I'm thinking that Wilfred's experience is very different from Noel's experience because of where they were socially. I mean, Noel would have been straight away a captain, and you've got Private Wilfred there going off to the front lines, sort of thing. So yeah,
depicts war experience. There you go.
Oh, that's true.
Good one. It's a good one. Changing material circumstances or something like that is also in there. Lana may be able to answer this in the affirmative. I just wanted to put that. If you've ever been comforted by a bit of moss, you might want to read this. It's a good one.
I haven't been comforted by a bit of moss. I have slipped on a bit of moss and ended up in a river. But thankfully, it was quite a deep river, so I didn't like hurt my butt or anything.
Oh, no.
I just got extremely damp.
That does not sound
I've not been comforted by moss. It stripped me up, but I still thought that phrasing was really beautiful.
Yeah. The way, it's the ending of the chapter. It's the light. It's the moment, and it's the self-awareness of the chasm within, rather than just like, this is the only thing I can think of. What other people value is the only value that I can find. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna say Wilfred's my favorite arc too, because he's much more interesting by the end. Okay. Jane Austen of the 20th century. That is how Dorothy Whipple's been called. Not a great writer, but also Jane Austen of the 20th century. So I don't know how you reconcile these.
I can't reconcile it. I don't know. How do you feel?
So I guess when people say Jane Austen, they mean someone who writes about seemingly domestic settings and small concerns, but what it represents is much larger to individuals, and it's basically making a statement about some people have a lot broader horizons and opportunities than others. And here's the smaller world, in case y'all were curious, and this is why we are worthy of going out into this greater world and, conquering just as much as you are. And so I like that little feisty spirit. And I think it's a great setup of like taking the smaller setting and using it to have a commentary on the larger world. But yeah, I can't reconcile those two either, because Jane Austen is a great writer. And Dorothy Whipple, I mean, I'd want to read another book before I said it, but I really love this one. So,
yeah, I really enjoyed it. The interesting thing is, with that comparison with Jane Austen, I'd rather compare her to like Elizabeth Gaskell, thinking about North and South, for example, because you get the main characters have sort of fallen from being, really well-to-do and go off to the north and have a harder life. And you've got a comparison between Margaret Hale and her cousin, who's living the high life still. So you've got two different social classes there. But with Jane Austen, I feel like very often it tends to be the higher classes. Maybe in Emma, when you've got Emma meddling about with, different characters who, the farmers and stuff. perhaps then, but otherwise, I think this book has a lot more in terms of looking at different social classes.
That's true. Yeah, I think Cranford a little bit when I think of this. Yeah, I like that. Okay. One of the questions I thought up was brought about by my reading this last night. So I'm not very far into it, but this is my nonfiction for the board. The Cruise of the Nona, which is Hilaire Belloc, who's a French-born but British famous writer of the early 20th century. And this is his like talking about sailing around Wales so far, but also putting in as much of his Thomas Carlyle like judgments of the world and his experience as he can. And he's talking about leaders of men and how people who are leaders have to have at once an individual judgment and a crowd judgment. And so those two skills in one person are so rare that, like, he comments on Louter, one of the speakers of parliament or something, as being one of the rare examples he can find in this. And so I thought, okay, there's this for the men in leadership that he sees, but what about women in business? So for high wages, I think Jane Carter definitely walks a line of the business sense and doing all her research and, hustling that line, as much as she can, but also the actual tasks of the trade are very intimate. You have to know the women, their secrets, their insecurities, and that's part of being a good shop person, is serving your public and being discreet and meeting their needs and anticipating their needs and all this sort of thing. And I thought, this is perfect for women. Like, there's a balance of the intimate interaction with customers, as well as like the ambition and the number crunching and the spreadsheets on 3 screens, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I came up with last night as I was like dreaming my way through this. What do you think about women in business in this novel and what that might say today?
Well, I think with Jane, obviously there's definitely more opportunity now, and it's less rare. She was, like really ahead of her time. Other people like Maggie, for example, wouldn't have thought of that. They were going to stay in the positions that they were in, and it was quite interesting at some point in the book where they've sort of like diverged on their paths, and something happens. I don't want to spoil it, but something happens, and Maggie makes the comment, "Oh, we're all going out onto the street," whereas Jane Carter will be too high and mighty and will be in her shop, sort of thing. And that and that to me was, quite indicative, because like Maggie is sort of like taking her cue from society and going, "This is my place as a woman in this society of this class." And Jane stepped out of it, and look at her thinking she's also great for having done that. That's sort of like spite and jealousy, because although she herself doesn't want to do all of these things, and not being able to be happy for her. So there's also Mrs. Greenwood was initially, not all that keen on Jane for various reasons, but all because of her actual ability. People come round to her, her first couple of days in business were very, very tentative, and she had those fears that perhaps everyone's right, no one's going to come to her. But lo and behold, her abilities bore out. So I think the difference is, back then it was even more of a risk than it is now. It is still a risk for us, and yes, it is still skewed, but I don't think in the same sense. I don't feel,
All right. The risk. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking your comments making me think about the books like Lean In, like the whole women in business. Are we solidarity with other women, or is it intersectionally divided because Black women don't feel like they're in the debate because white women are siding with white men over women's solidarity? Like, there's all these sort of other things that come into it, I think, today for this women in business debate, but a risk of going it alone. I had to think more about that one. I like.
Well, the interesting thing is the most risk-averse character in the book is someone you wouldn't expect to be risk-averse because he has got that solid base, but he's sort of like dug himself in there, and that's Mr. Chadwick, because all of her ideas she actually first brings to him, and I'm so glad that he didn't have the capability to actually steal them, because she laid it all out for him. So
yeah. All right, so we have a couple comments. Lana's saying she has been comforted by moss. She pets it when she's on walks, which I can totally commune with. Yes, I just did that yesterday. I had to get out of my apartment because they're showing the one below me and they didn't want me walking around too much. So I went on a walk, which is kind of false advertising, but whatever. And then Cena's here. Hello. And Cena loves moss too. See, all the good people love moss.
I love moss, especially in fiction when it can't attack me.
Nice. Let's see. Women in business, clothing in class. I think that's all the questions I'd thought of beforehand. What have I left out, or like, as this relates to other March of the Moderns discussions, what should like be our last takeaway, do you think?
Oh, well, I don't know about last takeaway, but I was thinking to myself in terms of there's a particular scene that involves the kiss, and I couldn't figure out. I reread that section a few times, and although it becomes clear at the end when everyone's sort of like moving in their opposite directions after this kiss and kind of regretting it and whatever, who orchestrated it, and you know who has orchestrated it because they say it. But I read that scene itself several times, and I was wondering if Dorothy Whipple steered away from that because we don't want to think badly of Jane as being the instigator, so it's not particularly explicit. I don't know how you felt, but I had to reread. I was like, wait, hang on. Who kissed who? What?
Yeah. On the park bench you're talking about when they're like in the moonlight. Yeah.
And it's supposed to be Jane, but I was like, well, that went really quick.
Yeah. It's I the way I was picturing the scene is that she's looking at the stars, she's in happy bliss, she's like looking at someone with a dreamy look on her face, but there's no movement, there's no initiative. It's just like a kiss happened. So I figured it was him, but then later we're told that it was more of her initiative, but then she regrets it. So I thought, oh, sorry. So she regrets it, and it was like, well, I don't know. I'm pretty good with just going what people tell me.
But I was just wondering if it is something off the time, kind of like writing at that time. She doesn't want you to feel, like think badly of the heroine, especially what her story arc is and everything. And therefore it just like sort of like rushes by really fast. And you're like, what happened?
Yeah, that could be totally true. Yeah, there's not the entire thing we get about sex in this book is the coming into the sitting room when you're not allowed, and that sort of risqueness. The meeting in the back alley, definitely not allowed with the Reverend or the person.
Oh, that was funny.
Yeah. And then all of the reasons she is not so big on men at the beginning, which is that they always like try to take something from her she's not willing to give. And so she just like, I don't need that. I don't need that drama. So let me just steer clear and be ambitious. So, yeah.
Well, I guess my overall takeaway is I definitely read more Dorothy Whipple. I'm up for reading her again.
Yeah, sounds good. I have other books from Persephone that I ordered, but not any other Dorothy Whipple. So, you have an Agatha Christie for the rest of the month. Yes. Yeah. I've got.
Yeah, I'm reading that with Lana. If Lana's still about, I'm reading Death on the Nile.
Yes. Yay. And that is on, I have it. There we go. That is on the Buddy Reads spreadsheet. So if anyone is curious what talks are still happening in the future, or wants to see what books people were reading to sleuth out their videos on them, that is also being done. That is a Google Doc, just coordinating people's reading and Buddy Reads. So be sure to check that out. What else? I went through all my questions. My tea is cold. I talked about the bingo board. One of my friends told me to, yes, Lana's excited for you. There you go. Woohoo! Told me to mention the fact that I have a Patreon because I don't usually do it. So I'll put that up here as well. Patreon possibilities. This was a readathon that I just put a lot of work out there because I wanted, again, like I said in the newbie tag, just to foster community and get people talking about important issues, reading the backlist, engaging thoughtfully across the world, and I love it. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'm gonna have a couple posts at the beginning of April with like takeaways from putting on a readathon. So if anyone is curious how much work it was or like what the results were, I will be pondering that for the beginning of April. And what else was I going to say?
Well, I would definitely be up for learning more about what it's like to put together something like this, because you've done a great job.
Thank you. Oh, here's what I was going to do. So I'm doing periodic searches for March of the Moderns, and I'm putting it on the playlist. So I wanted to put the playlist out there in case anyone else wanted to catch up. That is the list of all the videos that I've been able to find because they put it in the description at least. And so that's pretty fun. So yeah, lots of people who aren't on the spreadsheet too. So I was like trying to cast a wide net just for everyone participating in any way, because like you don't have to get a bingo. I may not end up getting a bingo, although we'll see, cross my fingers. But someone who does will get a Persephone book in the mail. That's my little bait I put out there. But even just reading one, or, reading something that's on your shelf that's from 1900 to 1945, 1901 to 1945 specifically, but anywhere around there, it's like horseshoes, is encouraged just because it's an interesting time period. And as a historical fiction writer, I feel like oftentimes we ignore things that happened in the past at our peril. As right now in the United States, at least, you can definitely see like there's things we can learn from in the past. So hence my my writing and my reading and my encouraging others to join in. So there you go. Thank you everyone for joining. I have a thank you banner. Where is it? There we go. Happy vernal equinox. If anyone doesn't know, today is 21st. Yeah, it's the vernal equinox. It's the exact same time for the day and the night. So kind of fun. And thanks for coming by to watch. Our next next buddy read is Friday, the 26th, with Weinert of Rainier Books, and we're going to be reading or discussing A Passage to India, which I have to get started on. And then the 28th is The Enchanted April with Sina and Angie and Kelly, and so that'll be a big group to discuss. And then the 31st, next Wednesday, is The Historian that I recruited to talk about Their Eyes Were Watching God. So all firsts for me. Actually, no, I've read Forster before. So second Forster, first Enchanted April is by... I just blanked.
Sina.
Yes, first for that, and first for Zora Neale Hurston. So time to get on that train. But feel free to join in, ask questions ahead of time on those. They're on YouTube, and you can, get subscribed to be reminded when they go live. And so you can participate because it's fun, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's also, I hadn't read many books written in the 1930s. I think the only ones really, Agatha Christie, yes. But I can't think of very many authors that I've read who wrote in the time period of the March of the Moderns. So E.M. Forster, I've watched the movie adaptations. I've not read him. Yeah. So yeah, enjoyed it.
Cool deal. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Check
out the playlist. And thank you, Katja. Thank you, anyone watching. And we'll catch you again later.